Hey everybody, welcome to the video. Let's go over the 12-game MLB DFS slate for today on Draftkings. But before we continue, as always, if you guys could just leave a like, and if you're new to the channel, you might as well hit that subscribe button. It's going to be here all season long trying to help you guys become better MLB DFS players that cover other sports as well. So if you're going to keep coming back to the channel each and every single day or each and every single week, you might as well hit that subscribe button, turn the notification bell so you don't miss out whenever I post new videos. If you don't follow me on social media, I'm at ChrisPennell16 on Twitter. I'm at CPenn16 over on IG. And if you want to support my content over on Patreon, it's obviously much appreciated. I do appreciate each and every single one of you guys. You get access to the content I put out every single day, the extra content in addition to what I do on YouTube, and I update everything throughout the day. And I put a lot of stuff out there, so I do appreciate everyone that supports me there. And if you don't know anything about Patreon, it cycles on the first of the month, so this is the best time to do so. So if you're interested, the time is pretty much now. If you're not, that's fine. Let's just dive into today's slate. So looking at pitchers, there's some decent 9K range options, but for the most part, I don't really like anybody else. I don't feel comfortable with anybody else, but I feel like I'm going to end up having to roster one of these guys. So as of right now, these are just the guys that look decent, and Wade LeBlanc does not look decent to me. I just threw him on there just because he's a cheap pitcher, and I'll talk about the matchup in a little bit. But this is a Coors Field slate, meaning I want some expensive Coors Field's bats. So if I had a punt a pitcher, I'm thinking this might be the guy I'd look at the most. I mean, you can also look at Kikuchi, who might grade out pretty well in projections, just point per dollar wise. But he's going up against the A's offense, which definitely has some power versus left-handed pitching. And I would rather stack the A's than use Kikuchi. So we'll go through it. I'm going to add some probably more pitchers to my player pool throughout the day. I'm recording this at 12 in the morning the night prior, so obviously things can change. But as of right now, these are the guys that I have somewhat of an interest in. But I know someone that won't change my mind or, get out of my player pool throughout the day tomorrow is Jack Flaherty. He's 9,500, and I think he is the ace of the slate here. And he's just back half of the season. Last season, he was absolutely elite, had over a 30% strikeout rate, and was just pretty much dominant. He was the guy you wanted to roster pretty much every single day. And Vegas likes him in this one. 3.9 runs against him, 7 strikeouts, 57% chance for a win. Now he's going up against the Brewers, which is not like a top team to target, but they do strike out quite a bit versus right-handed pitching, near 25% last season, 98 WRC plus versus them. Now he's not in the best pitcher's park in the world in Milwaukee, but still I think Jack Flaherty should be fine here. He's coming off a very strong outing on an opening day versus Pittsburgh, where he scored 24 points. I think he went 89 pitches, and he had 6 strikeouts, allowed 2 runs, and overall a pretty good performance from Jack Flaherty. He was cruising, gave us some runs at the very end, but still overall a really good performance for Flaherty. And since he went around 90 pitches, I think we're going to see close to a full workload for Flaherty here, and I think he can rake up the strikeouts versus the Brewers. And Vegas would agree as well. And if you're looking at his numbers last season, he had a 30% K rate, less than a 3 ERA, 3.64 xFIP, 7% walk rate. He's good versus lefties and righties. I think Flaherty is the best spend-up option on this slate at pitcher, and I'm viewing him as pretty much the ace on this slate. Then dropping down 200, we have Tyler Glasnow. He comes in at 9,300. Now, the only glaring issue with Glasnow is the pitch count, because he only threw 74 pitches in his first outing. But he was very efficient in those 74 outings. Like, he was just racking up the strikeouts. He only went 4 innings, but he still struck out 9 batters, which was an insane rate. Now, I don't expect him to do that again, but I'd have to imagine his pitches go up a little bit here. We might see him be around 80. I think he was around 72, 75 in his first start. Maybe we get 5 innings out of him, but he's got a really soft matchup versus the Orioles, which is not a matchup that I am scared of whatsoever. And Vegas likes him in this one too. 3.64 runs against him, 67% chance for the win, one of the heaviest favorites on the slate, and 7 strikeouts. And his numbers last season were absolutely excellent. I mean, he had a less than 2 ERA, 2.94 xFIP, 33% strikeout rate, limited the hard contact, only 28%, 0.59 home runs per 9 innings. Now, this is a downgrade for Tyler Glasnow that he's in Camden Yards instead of in the Trop. But still, Tyler, I don't really see anyone on the Orioles giving him too much trouble. If you're looking at their splits versus righties last season, just overall really weak numbers. They struck out more versus lefties, but still versus righties, not good numbers whatsoever. 170 ISO, 304 WOBA, 87 WRC plus, 23% strikeout rate. Tyler Glasnow's certainly got the stuff, but his only issue is he's not going to have the same kind of pitch count as Jack Flaherty, which is why I'm viewing Jack Flaherty as the number 1 pitcher on the slate, because we're probably going to expect around 100 pitches for Flaherty here as long as all goes well for him, unless he gets blown up. but I don't expect him to get blown up. So Glass now, even though he's probably going to be topped around 80 pitches, he can certainly be efficient, and if he goes 5 innings, he could certainly get the win as well. So I think he's a fine pivot off of Flaherty. Can you play both together? You could, but you might be sacrificing some bats. But the problem is, I don't really like any of these mid-range options. I think Tyler Chatwood at around 8K is somewhat interesting versus the Pirates, but he's a hard guy to trust as well. So as of right now, this is kind of the group I'm looking at. But dropping out to 100, we have Carlos Carrasco. He's 9,200. And look, Mike Clevenger really let me down last night. He had no command whatsoever. He was walking guys. He threw 40-some pitches in the first inning, first batter against Max Kepler. He just launched a ball versus him, and overall, he just looked really, really bad. Eddie Rosario also did some damage in the first inning as well, hit a high fastball. But, oh man, Clevenger really let me down. But the thankful thing is I still cashed because pretty much all the pitchers on the slate sucked for the most part that had some decent ownership. I mean, Clevenger gave up 4 runs, didn't really do much. I think he scored 4 points. McCullers gave up 4 runs. Mike Minor didn't do that well. So it really didn't matter too much. And also Castillo, the major chalky, was 95% owned in cash games. He only scored 10 points. So it's pretty much one with your bats on that slate if you were in cash games, which thankfully the Padres stacked for me. I had Pham and Tatis. They went off in the ninth inning, which I was very thankful for. So I do appreciate that. But Carrasco, he's coming off a really good outing versus the Royals where he threw 10 strikeouts and had nearly 30 fantasy points. Now, the matchup versus Minnesota is scary. The Indians pitching staff, while on fire, is not completely bulletproof. We saw that with Clevenger as he just kind of got shelled a little bit versus the Twins. He was really struggling with the command, but Carrasco is certainly someone that should be on your radar because he definitely has some upside here. Now, he's pretty expensive, and I don't like the matchup whatsoever, but still, he's got excellent stats. Last season, he had a 5.29 ERA, but his xFIP was nearly 2 runs lower at 3.5. He's got a near 30% strikeout rate. He's got good control, only a 5% walk rate. The matchup versus Minnesota is horrendous, but Carrasco is someone that, I have decent confidence in. I know I said the same thing with Clevenger, and I might be just being a homer having Carrasco up here, but I still have some interest. He looked really sharp in his first outing, and he did throw 87 pitches, so we're probably going to see around 90-plus pitches for Carrasco, which is fine as long as he doesn't get blown up. Now, the Indians do have nearly 5 runs against them, which is a little higher than I'd like to see. He's also an underdog in this matchup at 46% chance for the win and 6.5 strikeouts, but I like the talent for Carrasco, but the pitching options aren't that great on this slate. I think Jack Flaherty's quite easily the best option, and then Tyler Glasnow's in an elite spot, but he's got the pitch count issue, so it's a kind of a tough slate for pitching, to be honest. And now getting to the gross part of this, we have Wade LeBlanc here at 4,400. Trust me, I don't feel good about this at all, but I did want to just leave you guys with a bunch of 9K plus pitchers, considering this is a Coors Field slate, and we're going to want to spend up for some bats. So if you want to go crazy and you want to play Wade LeBlanc, I get it. I think he's a better play than Kikuchi, which neither plays are really that well or really that good. But Tampa Bay did strike out a ton versus lefties last season. They actually had the highest strikeout rate in the league versus lefties. Now, Wade LeBlanc is not a strikeout guy, but let's look at his numbers. Let's just look at his numbers. I actually have interest in a race stack, by the way, so don't think I'm really advocating for LeBlanc here, but I can make a case for him, just a dirt cheap price tag. So last season, 5.1 xFIP, not good. 17% strikeout rate, also not good. 6% walk rate, I'll take that. Didn't walk too many guys. Gave up nearly 2 home runs per 9 innings, 35% hard contact rate. Yeah, it's Wade LeBlanc. We're not trying to get elite numbers here. We're just kind of hoping he gets 8 to 10 points for the most part. That's really it. But if you're looking at the splits for the Rays versus lefties last season, they had a 26% strikeout rate, 165 team ISO, 99 WRC plus, and a 317 WOBA. Look, if you can strike out a few guys, maybe give up 3 runs, go, maybe 4 innings, not just get completely shelled, it might be viable because if you're using LeBlanc, it opens up guys like, Nolan Arenado, Trevor Story, Tatis, Pham, all those guys. You can just you can still fit those guys in playing a couple of these 9K guys, or even a guy like Tyler Chatwood at 8K. But if you want to go full on out Coors, because there's 2 worse pitchers on the mound this time around, I totally get that. If you want to punt with LeBlanc, the matchup at least has some strikeout upside. The guy's not a good strikeout pitcher. I think Vegas only has him at 4Ks. But if he can just get a few strikeouts, go a few innings, not get shelled, I think you'll be happy at 4,400. Now, the park's not good for pitching in Baltimore, certainly, but it's not the worst thing in the world, right? it's gross, but it's pretty much just to fit in some bats. But I think that's all I want to talk about for pitching, so we can probably move on to the batters now. And up top at catcher, we have Gary Sanchez. He's 4,700. Now, he has been absolutely dreadful this season. I'm pretty sure he's like 0 for 15, around 10 strikeouts. He got the day off last night versus Ryan Weber, but I expect him to be back in the lineup here. He's in a complete slump, so I totally get it if you don't want to play him. But the Yankees, once again, check in as one of the better stacks on the slate. Not as good as any of the guys in Coors Field. I mean, they both have run totals above 6, but I think both are excellent options. Yankees or Padres or even the Rockies. I mean, they all make sense. Or actually, the Rockies don't have an implied team total of over 6. It's at 5.76, but I could see that reaching 6. Joey Lucchesi is not the worst pitcher in the world, but still, I mean, I definitely have a lot of interest in the Rockies. But anyway, Gary Sanchez going up against Zach Godley. Godley looked pretty solid in his first start. I think he had nearly 20 fantasy points in 4 innings, but he also wasn't pitching against the Yankees. He was pitching against the Mets, and the Yankees obviously have a much better lineup, and they have tons of power. They strike out a bit, but they also have tons of power, and Gary Sanchez has over a 300 ISO versus right-handed pitching. If you're looking at Godley's splits, he is worse versus lefties, but he only has a 15% strikeout rate versus righties, and that's lines up pretty good for the Yankees, who are a high strikeout team. That Godley does not get many strikeouts versus them, so or versus both sides of the plate. So Sanchez is fine if you are stacking the Yankees, but I'd probably want to spend down at catcher for the most part. Then Yasmani Grandal, he's 4,400, should be betting cleanup here, and I think the White Sox make a decent stack on this slate. So Ronald Bolanos is the projected opener. Then I think Glenn Sparkman's supposed to be coming in, but he hits right-handed pitching pretty well. If you're looking at his splits, 201 ISO, 372 on base percentage, 441 slugging. He's good versus lefties and righties, but I mean, splits are fine either way. And I think the White Sox actually make a decent stack on this slate because the bullpen for the Royals is not very good. They have a team total of over 5. I don't expect them to have much ownership on this slate, so I think they're more of a sneaky tournament options. You got guys like Jose Abreu, Edwin Carson-Leon, Yasmani Grandal, Eloy Jimenez, and a couple of other guys as well. So I think they make a decent tournament stack, but certainly not where I'd go in cash games for the most part. Then we have Austin Hedges. He's 3,800, and again, you're pretty much going to be wanting as many Royals and Rockies in your lineup as possible on this slate. He's 3,800, so he comes in at a pretty decent price tag. Now, he is better versus right-handed pitching, but I'll take anybody on the Padres versus Kyle Freeland. Freeland had a decent outing in his first start versus the Rangers, but keep in mind that was not in Coors Field. And Freeland, I mean, he's just not a guy I am too scared of. If you're looking at his splits last season, he gave a 284 ISO to right-handed bats, 15% strikeout rate, near a double-digit walk rate. And, I mean, pretty much every single righty is in play here for the Padres. I expect them to smash once again. And they have the highest applied team total on the slate. Dropping down to first base, we have another Padre and Will Myers at 4,800. You're going to see a common theme here, but if you are on the Padres or the Rockies, there's a good chance you made this player pool. But Will Myers, his splits versus lefties last season, 280 ISO, 130 WRC plus. I mean, look, they're all in play. Kyle Freeland sucks versus right-handed bats, and a lot of these guys are really good versus lefties, so it makes a ton of sense here to like Will Myers. Jose Martinez, 4,700. Look, I don't really like Wade LeBlanc. I know I had him listed here, but I think he might just get by. Maybe he gives up a couple of solo shots. But Jose Martinez, I think the Rays do make a decent stack. Plus, they'll get to the bullpen at some point. The bullpen sucks overall. But Martinez does have some pretty solid splits versus left-handed pitching. 271 ISO versus them, a 160 WRC plus, 600 slugging, and near 330 batting average. I do like some of these Rays righties, even though I had minor interest in Wade LeBlanc as a just complete punt option. But that was just a stack Coors Field. Obviously, I wouldn't stack against Wade LeBlanc if you're using him. But definitely think some of the righties make sense. And Jose Martinez is very good versus left-handed pitching. And then Paul Goldschmidt, 4,500. He's going up against lefty Brett Anderson. And anytime Goldie's going up against a lefty, you got to have some interest. He's just got really good numbers versus them this season, or last season. They also homered off of a lefty so far already this season, I believe, as well. But yeah, it's a 300 ISO versus them, a 148 WRC plus. And the thing is with Goldschmidt, he crushes in Milwaukee. Like, I don't know what it is, but he hits very, very well in that ballpark. Like, if you just look back at his statistics on whatever website, he hits very, very well in Milwaukee. So I don't know what it is. Maybe he just likes the way that stadium is, but I definitely like Goldschmidt as a one-off. I really don't have much interest in any of the other guys in this lineup, though. But I think he's a fine one-off. Then we also have Luke Voigt. He's 3,800, and he's going up against Zach Godley, and he actually had better power versus righties last season. If you're looking at his splits, he had a 206 ISO versus them, 131 WRC plus, 368 WOBAs. That Godley's got a low strikeout rate. I think all the Yankees are in play here for sure. Then we have Ty France. He's a cheaper option in Coors Field, and if you can get a cheap option in Coors Field, you should probably take it, because if you're spending up a pitcher, you're definitely going to need at least some value options. And if you can get a cheap option in Coors, I think that definitely would make me feel pretty good, and Ty France would qualify. You just get the righty on lefty matchup, and Kyle Freeland does suck versus right-handed bats. And if you're looking at France's splits versus lefties last season, he had a 273 ISO, so definitely had some pop in his bat. And if you're looking for value, I don't mind France. He's also eligible at second base as well. And dropping down to second base, we have Jurickson Profar at 4,900. And again, I love all the Padres. I'm going to sound like a broken record here, but they all make a ton of sense to me. Now, if you're looking at his numbers, he is better versus right-handed pitching. He has more power versus them, but he also has a better batting average versus lefties. So it's a little bit back and forth. He actually only has a 192 batting average versus right-handed pitching, but versus lefties, he has a 305 batting average, but less power. So I'll take a 305 batting average. Now, he's very expensive, but he's on the Padres or in Coors Field. Literally, the entire lineup is in play as long as they're righty for the most part. Even the lefties, I wouldn't hate either. Then DJ LeMahieu, he's only 4,200, which seems a little bit too cheap, especially being the leadoff guy for the Yankees. They have one of the higher team totals on the slate, nearly at 6. Wouldn't surprise me if they got close to 6 by game time. And the Red Sox pitching just really been a mess for the most part. The bullpen doesn't scare me, and LeMahieu at only 4,200 leading off. I think that's fair. He's better versus lefties, but still decent numbers versus righties as well. He's a high contact hitter too. Then going down, we have Adam Frazier. He's 3,500 going against Tyler Chatwood. Now, Tyler Chatwood looked pretty strong in his first outing. I believe he had 8 strikeouts, but I don't think he's going to be that good. And he's still nearly 4.5 runs against him. I think he's somewhat interesting as a mid-range option on the slate, just because Pittsburgh's just a pretty soft matchup overall. They lack power. But Adam Frazier's got decent splits versus righties. He only has 11% strikeout rate versus them, 285 batting average, 346 on base percentage. Don't love it, but if you're looking for a cheaper option, I think Adam Frazier's fine. Then Chris Owings, 3,000. If you're looking for cheap options in Coors Field, or I should say, if you're looking for cheap options, it makes sense to want to use the guys in Coors Field, and Chris Owings would qualify. Also eligible at shortstop as well. But if you're looking at his splits versus lefties, they're not great. He's not the greatest player in the world, but 35 WRC plus, 230 WOBO, 0.09 ISO, 164 batting average. It's not pretty, but it's just a cheap option in Coors Field, so you take what you can get. Then we also have Chad Pinder. He's 2,500, and he just gets a really nice price tag versus a very subpar pitcher in Kikuchi. And I actually think the A's make a decent low-owned stack, because I don't think a lot of people are going to play them, because for the most part, they're expensive. Chad Pinder's not, neither is Chris Davis. But Chapman's pretty expensive, and so not that expensive at 4,500, but more expensive than Chad Pinder for sure. And then you also have Matt Olson, and Marcus Simeon's pretty expensive. I think he's around 5K, but I think they make an interesting stack because a lot of people are going to play Coors, people are going to play Yankees, so I think they're going to go overlooked, and I think they make a decent GPP stack with the Chicago White Sox that I mentioned earlier, as the Rays as well. Though I don't think the Rays are going to be that low owned because they're going up against Baltimore, and any team that plays Baltimore tends to get some ownership. But Chad Pinder, he's fine going against the lefty, and Kikuchi's just not that great versus right-handed bats. Then going to third base, one of the top plays on the slate, and actually we have 2 of the best plays on the slate coming up in Manny Machado and Nolan Arenado. But Nolan Arenado, anytime he's going up against a lefty in Coors Field, he just automatically becomes one of the best plays on the entire slate because he crushes lefties, especially in Coors Field. If you're looking at his splits, he has a near 300 ISO versus them, a 611 slugging, 315 batting average, only a 15% strikeout rate. You gotta like Nolan Arenado here. He had 2 hits last night, only 2 singles, but you gotta like Nolan versus a lefty in Coors. Lucchesi did give up 186 ISO versus righties last season. Still had a respectable 22% strikeout rate, but it's Coors Field, so pitchers get neutralized here, and you gotta have some interest in Arenado if you have the money. Manny Machado, he's 5,200. I probably like Machado more than I like Arenado, just because Kyle Freeland's a much worse pitcher than Joey Lucchesi, because he just get absolutely crushed by right-handed bats. And Manny Machado, he had some of the best numbers versus left-handed pitching last season, like absolutely elite, 370 ISO, 441 WOBA, 177 WRC plus, and near 700 slugging, 315 batting average, 17% strikeout rate. Manny Machado is one of the best plays on the entire slate, and also since he's on the road, he gets that guaranteed 9th inning at bats as well. So Absolutely love Manny Machado here. He's also a little bit cheaper than Arenado, and I absolutely love the Padres. They have the highest team total on the entire slate. Matt Chapman, I kind of talked about this earlier, but I do think the A's make a decent GPP stack here versus Kikuchi, especially if Kikuchi is going to gain some ownership just because he's cheap. Now, again, I think all these cheap options kind of suck, including Wade LeBlanc, even though I talked about him, but if they can get you like 8 to 10 points and then Coors goes off and you have all the Coors bats, you'll be just fine. But I still think the Oakland A's make a decent stack versus Kikuchi. He's just not a very good pitcher, and Chapman's got some good splits versus lefties. 279 ISO, 513 slugging, so I think he's interesting. Moncada, kind of in the same situation as the A's here, because I think they're a pretty decent GPP stack. Prefer the Coors Field players in cash games, and obviously some Yankees, even some Tampa Bay Rays, but I think the White Sox make a decent tournament option here. Bolanos is supposed to open, and then Glenn Sparkman's supposed to come in. That could change, but both aren't that great versus left-handed bats, and Moncada is much better versus right-handed pitching than he is versus lefties. Like, much better. Just look at the splits here. You're going to see orange and yellows and even some reds here. Then we move on to righties. Dark shades of green, 148 WRC+. I mean, just excellent numbers all around. 322 batting average. So I think Moncada, if you're stacking up some Chicago White Sox, probably wouldn't go there as a one-off, but do like him in White Sox stacks. Then we have Yandy Diaz, 4,200 going against the lefty, and Wade LeBlanc, soft tossing lefty. He should be leading off here instead of G-Man Choi since they got a lefty on the mound, and he's got some pretty good splits versus lefties. 158 WRC+, 311 batting average, 272 ISO. He's fine. I like the price tag, and if I'm stacking the Rays, definitely wouldn't leave him off leading off, more than likely. Then dropping to shortstop, we have Fernando Tatis Jr. at 6,100, but I do think he is worth the price tag. I think there's a good chance he goes deep in this game, and he's been hot to start the season. He homered last night. I believe he stole a base, and I think he had close to 30 fantasy points, and he's got excellent numbers versus left-handed pitching, a 306 ISO, 510 WOBA, 223 WRC+, 419 batting average. He can do it all. He's got speed, he's got power, he's in Coors Field, going up against Freeland, who sucks versus righties. Yeah, if you have the money, pay up for Tatis. He's arguably the best play on the entire slate. Then Trevor Story, 5,900, comes in as a close second behind Tatis, but obviously much prefer Tatis. But Story is still an excellent option. He homered last night. He's got some good numbers versus lefties. Now, he was actually better versus righties last season, but Trevor Story versus lefty in Coors Field is kind of like Arenado, where you always have to have some interest. And then just keeping a theme here of some Yankees and some Coors Field bats, we have Gleyber Torres, 4,400, going up against Zach Godley. Now, Zach Godley's not the worst pitcher in the world, but still the Yankees have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate, and he's good versus lefties and versus righties. If you're looking at his numbers last season, 276 batting average versus them, 532 slugging, 256 ISO. Good numbers all around for Torres. I think all the Yankees are in play here for sure. Corey Seager, 4,100, going against Luke Weaver. Just a lefty on righty matchup here, and the Dodgers are obviously one of the best lineups in the league, and they crush right-handed pitching. I'm not really overly excited about the Dodgers, but I did like the price tag we have with Seager here at 4,100. Only a 5.13 implied team total for them, which is lower than a lot of teams on this slate that we've talked about, so not as much of interest in the lefties on the Dodgers, but I think they're fine in tournaments, but I just like other spots better. Then we have Willy Adames. He comes in at 4K, and just another righty versus Wade LeBlanc, and just for the most part, the Orioles bullpen. If you're looking at Adames splits versus lefties last season, they're not great. He actually had better splits versus righties, but all the Rays here are in play for me, to be honest, against the Orioles. I mean, the bullpen sucks, and they have over a 5 implied team total, so I don't mind Adames there. Then going to the outfield, we're obviously going to have a lot of good options. I think we have like 4 straight Coors Field guys here, but look, anyone in Coors Field is certainly in play. Now, Charlie Blackmon, he's 5,700, should be hitting cleanup. And people are going to skip over Blackmon because of the lefty-on-lefty matchup, but that is not something I would do. He was still pretty good versus left-handed pitching last season. If you're looking at his splits, he actually had a 274 ISO versus lefties compared to a 255 ISO versus righties. Overall, excellent numbers for him, over a 300 batting average versus lefties last season, so only a 17% strikeout rate. So if you're stacking the Rockies, people might leave off Charlie Blackmon because of the price tag and the lefty-on-lefty matchup, but that is not something I would shy away from. Now, it's not going to be as easy to fit him in cash games because of that massive price tag, so I'm viewing it as more of a tournament option, but I still like him. Then Trent Grisham, 5,100. Again, a lefty on lefty matchup, so I could see people leaving them off their board because people just hate lefty on lefty matchups. But Grisham was fine versus lefties last season. He actually had more power versus them. He had a 188 ISO versus lefties compared to 177 versus righties. Kind of like a similar situation with Blackmon. Not saying he's as good of a player as Blackmon in the slightest, but he still had some pop. And it's course fielding. It's Kyle Freeland, which no one should be scared of Kyle Freeland. He did have a 40% strikeout rate versus lefties last season, though, which is pretty horrendous. But he's going to see a righty at some point, and literally all the Padres are in play here. Tommy Pham, same thing goes for him. He's much better versus lefties than Trent Grisham is, considering he's a righty, but he had more power versus righties last season, but still overall solid numbers. 340 batting average versus lefties last season, only a 17% strikeout rate, 160 WRC plus. He's got power and speed upside, and he also had a 3-run home run shot in the 9th inning last night, which saved my day, so I do appreciate Tommy Pham there, and again, all the Padres are in play. David Dahl, I like in tournaments playing these lefties on lefties because people are going to shy away from him, but I certainly would not do that. And David Dahl's got fine numbers versus lefties, and once again, he had more power versus lefties last season, a 224 ISO compared to 221 versus righties. Overall, I would prefer him versus righties, but 319 batting average versus lefties last season is not too bad whatsoever. Did strike out quite a bit, but I like David Dahl. I wouldn't shy away from the lefty on lefty matchup. Then Aaron Judge, 4,600. He is mispriced again. He should be above 5K. I think Giancarlo Stanton's near Charlie Blackmon's price tag. So I'm not really sure why Aaron Judge is this cheap. He's homered 3 nights in a row, and that could certainly keep going to 4 nights against Zach Godley and whoever else Boston throws at them. Have one of the highest implied team totals on the slate, and if you're looking at his splits, he crushes lefties and righties. Better versus lefties, but he still crushes righties as well. He's actually went deep on righties 2 nights in a row, I believe. So yeah, I like the price tag on him, and he makes an excellent play. Hunter Renfroe, he should be in the cleanup spot for the for the Tampa Bay Rays here versus Wade LeBlanc, and he's very good versus left-handed pitching. If you're looking at his splits, he had a 336 ISO versus them last season, 127 WRC plus, and 239 batting average is a little gross, but he's definitely got some pop. We're in a good hitter's park, and look, anyone that's facing the Orioles this season is more than likely going to be played pretty much every single slate. I do like the Rays here, so Renfroe does check out for me. Aaron Hicks, he's 4,200. He's much better versus right-handed pitching than he is versus lefties. If you just look at his splits, you're going to see shades of red, yellow, nothing, green, just orange, reds, and yellows. Colors you do not want to see on a stat sheet. But if they're looking versus righties, you're going to see some green here. He has a 15% walk rate, 115 WRC plus, 261 ISO. Now, he does strike out quite a bit. But if you're stacking up the Yankees, I like the price tag you get with Aaron Hicks. Then we have Eloy Jimenez. He comes in at 4K, and he's just really part of that White Sox stack that I think is going to go probably under the radar that I think is pretty interesting. And he had more power versus righties last season. He had a 264 ISO versus them, 535 slugging, and 270 batting average. So I do like Eloy Jimenez in your White Sox stacks if you are stacking up the White Sox. And then we have Matt Kemp. He comes in at 3,400, and he's actually a really easy fit as long as he's hitting near the top of the order, which I would assume he's not going to be too low in the order because it's a righty on lefty matchup here. But I like anybody in Coors Field. They just all make sense to me. Going up against a lefty and Joey Lucchesi, 286 ISO versus lefties last season, a 70% ground ball rate, which kind of sucks, but 571 slugging, 286 batting average. If you're in Coors, you're on the list. Michael Brantley, he continues to be one of the best values in the slate every single night. I am not sure why he is free every single night. It makes absolutely no sense to me. He should be above 4K. He's pretty much like a 4,500 plus kind of batter, which we're getting him at nearly a $2,000 discount. I remember at some points last season, he was above 5K. I'm not sure why he's 2,900. He gets a matchup versus a righty and Griffin Canning. Brantley's numbers versus righties are just too good at this price tag. I mean, 8% strikeout rate. He's a really, really high contact hitter, but he's also got some pop in his bat as well. 226 ISO, 146 WRC plus, 323 batting average versus them. Brantley's an elite play in all formats and should be hitting cleanup as well for an elite level offense. Then Josh Reddick, he's kind of like the poor man's Michael Brantley here. He just continues to be too cheap on a good offense. 2,100. Much prefer Michael Brantley, but if you're in a pinch and you need a guy that's near mid price, Josh Reddick is fine for me. But I think that's pretty much everyone I want to go over. There's a lot of guys to talk about, but it's a big slate and there's a lot of good options. So I do appreciate everybody watching. If you found this video helpful, remember to leave a like. It really does help me out. I really do appreciate it. Subscribe if you're new. And if you're into NASCAR, I did post my NASCAR video yesterday, so check it out if you haven't already. And if you want to sign up on Patreon, feel free to do so. Follow me on social media, and that's going to be it. And I'll see you guys in the next one, and I hope you guys have a fantastic weekend.